All right, so we're diving into some Canadian visa stuff today.
Uh-huh.
We've got a great information from you
Yeah.
all about work visitor visas, student visas.
Right.
And I think the goal here is really just to distill, what are the big changes and
Yeah.
what does it all mean for me, whether I'm, the employer or the student or just someone visiting.
Exactly. We want to make sure we're giving everyone sort of the need to know
Yeah,
without
right.
getting too bogged down in
Right.
all the, little details.
Yeah, and these sources you gave me really give us a snapshot, I think, of how things are changing
Yeah.
across all these different visa types.
Mm.
So instead of getting, lost in the weeds of it all, what are the big sort of trends that you saw as you were looking at all this stuff?
Well, it was really fascinating to see that the Canadian government is really actively refining their visa policies.
Okay.
One thing that really stood out to me was with work visas specifically.
Yeah.
They seem to be taking a much more targeted approach
Absolutely.
to attracting workers in very specific industries.
Gotcha.
Industries that are facing some pretty significant labor shortages.
So I'm listening to this and I'm thinking about Canada. That means that there might be even more opportunities for me
Exactly.
if my skills line up with what
Right.
they're looking for.
Exactly. If you've got those in-demand skills,
Right.
this could be, a new avenue for you.
Yeah.
And I think
It sounds like they're changing.
they're even looking at how they assess eligibility
Right.
for certain work permits.
Okay.
So there might be some changes there.
So really adapting to what the economy needs.
Absolutely. And I think if you connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
this focus on specific labor needs, it could actually mean that, there are faster pathways
Okay.
for certain skilled workers to come in
Okay.
to help contribute to Canada's economy.
Makes sense.
They're being very strategic about filling those gaps
Right.
that they have.
Okay, so that's work visas. What about visiting Canada? What about visitor visas?
Yeah, so it looks like there are updates aimed at making it easier for people to come to Canada
Yeah.
for all sorts of reasons, tourism, business, you name it.
Okay.
And there are even hints that, they might expand who's actually eligible for a visitor visa.
Interesting.
Okay.
So I guess the takeaway there is if I'm thinking about going to Canada, even just to visit,
Yeah.
I should double check all the requirements because
Absolutely.
things might have changed.
Make sure you're checking the most up-to-date
Right.
information from the official government resources.
Now, what about students? What about student visas?
Yeah, so for student visas, it seems like a lot of the updates are focusing on
Okay.
making sure that international students are having a really high-quality educational experience,
Okay.
which makes sense. They're really important stuff.
Yeah.
Part of Canada's academic community.
Right.
But I think the key thing for prospective students is to really look at the specific criteria for getting a study permit.
Okay.
Have they changed the requirements for, financial resources
Right.
or the list of schools that are actually approved to host international students?
Right.
These are details that can really impact your plans. So
Yeah, for sure.
you got to stay informed.
I mean, one of the things that really stood out to me in reading all this stuff is
Yeah.
it feels like all these visa categories aren't set in stone.
Right.
You know?
They're very dynamic. They
Yeah,
change.
they're evolving.
Yeah, as Canada's, economic and social landscape changes,
Right.
their visa policies reflect that.
So if there's one big takeaway for our listeners,
Yeah.
what would it be?
I think the biggest takeaway is stay informed.
Okay.
Whether you're an individual who's, applying for a visa or you're an employer,
Right.
you need to stay on top of the latest changes.
Gotcha.
Regularly check those government websites for the most up-to-date announcements and requirements.
Perfect. So final takeaway, Canadian work visitors, student visas.
Yes,
They're all being updated.
constantly changing.
So as you plan your, work or study or visit to Canada,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the questions that you think people should be asking themselves?
Well, after hearing all this, are you wondering about specific eligibility criteria?
Right.
Or maybe you're thinking about the processing times
Right.
and how those might have changed.
Yeah.
We really encourage you to take a look at those official immigration websites
Right.
because that's where you're going to find the most current information.
Absolutely.
Things can change quickly.
Great advice. Thanks so much for breaking all this down.
My pleasure.
To all our listeners, we'll see you next time on The Deep Side.
Hey.